I've been working as a psychotherapist for over 47 years, and the word psychotherapist connotes different things to different people. I call the therapy I practice radical. Comes from the word radix, meaning root, back to the roots. I would say that the essence of why people come to see me and what I do with them is exactly the same as it was 2,000 years ago. There may be progress in technology, there may be progress in science, but there really isn't any progress in ethics and politics, which I consider psychotherapy to be like. Already Aristotle, when he wrote the first book on ethics, distinguished three different sciences. The first one was theoretical, like physics and mathematics. The second one was productive sciences, such as architecture or medicine, which have blueprints. You know whether a building is well built because you can match it against a blueprint. If I had a broken bone, I would want to go to a physician because he has a blueprint for how the bones ought to be, and he can fix my arm so the bones will heal in the proper way. Unfortunately, psychotherapy got under the heading of medicine, psychiatry. It's a historical accident, and a very bad one, I would say. Because the third kind of science Aristotle pointed to was, he called it practical sciences, and he gave two examples. One was ethics, the other one was politics. Ethics is examining the phenomenology of how we treat each other. And politics is the art of how to accrue and maintain power. Not over anyone, but in order to be able to do what I want to do and not to have to do what I don't want to do. I would say the greatest cause of unhappiness is powerlessness, not some kind of drummed up, invented psychological category that now is listed in the compendium called DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, now in its probably 5th edition, which is really like a witch's hammer, the Malleus Maleficarum. In the Middle Ages, Dominican monks compiled a thick book that you could look up whether a person accused of witchcraft was actually a witch or not. I think that as far as psychiatry and present-day psychology is concerned, we are still in the dark ages. To actually have a person come into my office and come up with a label of what is wrong with him is would add to that person's troubles. It's an objectifying gaze, and it's really a label that could follow that person for life. It's a degradation process. Everyone who goes into a psychiatrist's office or a psychologist's office is going to be degraded, objectified. Most people who come to me suffer already large amounts of degradation and a history of not being taken seriously, of categorized, sorted and counted. I got into psychology late, after I have gotten my qualifications in mathematics, physics, and chemistry. And when in my first psychology course, I was told that psychology was a science, and the purpose of psychology was to predict and control human behavior. I couldn't believe my ears. To the present day, I would say psychology is a pseudoscience. It's a wannabe science, but unfortunately it isn't. It misuses statistics. Statistics was invented for identical objects. Now, people are neither identical nor are they objects. It was for example, genetically identical grains of wheat or barley, or genetically identical mice. I don't believe human behavior can be predicted. I don't believe human behavior can be controlled. The encounter between two people in the room where therapy takes place is always unique. Aristotle said the practical sciences cannot possibly have theory because two situations never repeat. Two situations are never the same, can't step in the same river twice. So I would say a good psychotherapist has to be an eternal beginner and look at everyone fresh for the first time. And even if two people would come in manifesting the same symptoms, complaining about the same things, I would have to basically ask each of them to teach me about them, rather than me saying, I know what this is. This is personality disorder number 2. The moment I see people as members of a category, of a class, I don't see them sharply, I don't see them in focus, I see them blurred. You're a man. Okay, so what does that tell me about you? Nothing. You're schizophrenic. Well, there are as many different ways of arriving at something that would be labeled as schizophrenia as there are individuals who get labeled like that. And who gets labeled like that? I think those people get labeled who are not careful and get into the hands of a psychiatrist who will label them. One of the first things I would teach someone who comes to me who I realize would be labeled as schizophrenic is to teach them who to approach and who to avoid. I think one can live a very creative life if one is capable of avoiding those people who would stuff you, force you into categories like round pegs into square holes. It's inhuman what we do to people who come for help. Psychiatry seems to be incorrigible, and so is psychology. Over 50 years ago, Thomas Sass said, there is no such thing as mental illness. It's a bad metaphor. Either somebody has brain disease, or people have problems in living. He delineated it brilliantly, clearly, logically. It's as if he never spoke. No one takes him seriously. Understanding him, taking him seriously would mean that people who have been practicing under the misconception would have to admit that they made a mistake. People don't want to. You know, it's very much like there's a famous Hungarian obstetrician who around 1848 worked in the Vienna Lying-in hospital. And the lore was that women were dying of puerperal fever, which was supposed to be some kind of epidemic, except women only died in the doctor's wing of the hospital, not where the midwives were. So Semmelweis, who was what was the name of the doctor, instituted washing of hands in his ward. And suddenly, women were not getting sick and dying. So he suggested to his fellow doctors in a very impassioned article, please wash your hands before you touch a woman who is about to give birth. He said, we may be infecting them, in fact. Well, it was so repulsive to his colleagues that they laughed him out of court. It took another 30 or 35 years before doctors started washing their hands because the microscope wasn't invented, so there was no proof. When the microscope was invented, they discovered that doctors were working in the basement, cutting up corpses for teaching purposes, and they took bits of corpse with which they infected women. That's why they were dying. But the fear, the terror of realizing that, say, for 20 years I've been actually harming people, prevented them from changing their practice. Well, I think that's exactly what's going on in psychiatry and psychology. People who have been invested in harming people under the guise of helping them are not going to admit that they've been doing that, no matter what the evidence is. What I learned in my apprenticeship with R.D. Laing, a Scottish psychiatrist who thought differently from his colleagues, that actually if someone is suffering, the problem is not in that person, that we suffer because of what's between us. People don't suffer unless somebody has treated them badly. That's where the ethics comes in. No one is suffering who hasn't been traumatized, who hasn't been hurt. So psychiatry is kind of the handmaiden of those people who hurt children and want to wash their hands of it, saying if somebody goes crazy later, it's in the genes, it's some kind of mental illness. It's not because a girl's father raped her or a boy's mother weaned him prematurely because somebody was beaten. No, that's all can be taken in stride. There must have been some mental disorder. So the situation is grim. I think that all a psychotherapist has to do is listen and learn and allow the patient to teach him or her about what only the patient knows about, his or her experience. The patient has to be taken seriously. Actually, the core issue in trauma is not being taken seriously. A rape is trauma because the one who is being raped clearly indicates stop, and the rapist doesn't take the person seriously. A parent who physically beats his child and doesn't take the child seriously. There is no empathy. So Laing used to say that we are going to hell in a handbasket unless there may be an epidemic of love that really all anybody needs who has been hurt is someone who is trustworthy, someone who is loving, someone who is supportive. That's what people have been missing who arrive at my doorsteps. Basically, I think a person needs a therapist when they run out of friends. Often, people have told me that in their whole life, nobody ever listened to them seriously until they have come into my office. That's very sad. I personally think I'd be out of a job if people would listen to each other and take each other seriously.